Okay, my name is Peter McMahon. I'm a designer and executive director of the Cape Cod Modern House Trust, which is a group that's doing preservation and documentation of the significant modernist architecture on outer Cape Cod. Well, there was an existing art colony here from Eugene O'Neill, and those people were in Provincetown, and then a lot of writers came here in the 20s and 30s, and then a group of sort of bohemian guys who were rich, from rich families, who were a little bit escaping out here. One of them inherited a very large piece of land, another one bought a large piece of land. Land was very cheap, and they started building kind of their version of modern architecture. They were untrained, but they had been to Europe and seen some modern architecture. And so they started building almost like kind of folk modernist buildings out here, out of just driftwood and homosote and really simple structures. They knew, friends of theirs knew some of the European modernists who were starting to emigrate to the US. This is just before, in the build up to the war. The first one was Serge Chermayeff. He came here, and then this guy, Jack Phillips, who had inherited this large piece of land, would sell them a piece of land, and then their friends would come. And Marcel Breuer came here in the late 40s, and then he became the center of this group. His engineer, Paul Weidlinger, moved nearby, and Zanti Chavinsky, who was original Bauhaus faculty. A lot of the Bauhaus people came because of Breuer. And then there were these sort of well-known established European modernists who would be here in the summer and build houses for themselves and for their friends. And then there were these local guys who were kind of cross-pollinating with them. So we've ended up with like 95 modernist houses down here. Nobody really realized how many there were because they're back in the woods. And these people were living private lives here. A lot of them were very public in their other lives. So most of them are privately owned, but it turns out that 7 of them are in the national park and were in this legal limbo and were supposed to be torn down because they were built after the cutoff date for building in the park. Basically, the park, because of doing this exhibit, I started talking with the national park, the National Seashore, the local national park here, and they suggested the idea that we start a nonprofit and that they could lease us the buildings one by one, and we could raise money to restore them and use them as a scholar and artist in residence program. Well, those first buildings were literally made with wood that washed up on the beach and homosote. Homosote was hugely popular. It's pressed paper. And it was very cheap and versatile. And there was a lot of buildings made with homosote as an exterior material, which would just be painted. And some of those buildings survive 40 years later just as painted homosote, which is kind of amazing. Actually, this house is all of the exterior soffits are homosote. And so very inexpensive. Breuer's house and Kepisch's house, who is his very close friend, the 2 houses were built for $5,000 together because they were identical. Very cheap, very simple, but kind of radical buildings. Yeah, there's Charlie Zender that did this house. I talked to his ex-partner, and he said that they used to actually just put up a box frame of studs and then cover it with homosote, and then actually just cut windows, with a mat knife where they thought they would be. It's almost like a stage set, or it's almost like a sketching a building, and then they would sort of frame around the openings. Well, a lot of these houses were built when they were just starting out. Like Breuer built his house in '47 when he was just getting established. He was just breaking away from Gropius, starting his own firm. Chermayeff built his first house here in '44. So a lot of these guys were fairly recent immigrants. And were teaching or, didn't have much money. So a lot of these houses were built before they really made it big. And then they never really expanded them because the aesthetic here was that you come in the summer and you really it's almost like a tent, you're living outdoors, you're spending all your time outdoors, and they're super simple buildings. Well, Serge Chermayeff lived right across from Breuer. His sons, Peter and Ivan. Ivan's a very famous graphic designer, logo designer, and Peter is an architect. And then Olaf Hammerstrom, who worked with Saarinen and Oliver Aalto, and his wife, Marianne Strengel, who was the very famous textile designer, lived here. There was Nathaniel Saltonstall, who was a Boston architect who did a lot of really interesting modern buildings here. There was those three original guys that came here in the 30s, which is Hayden Walling, Jack Phillips, and Jack Hall, who were mostly local phenomena. There were also a lot of very interesting people who were kind of in that milieu, like just 2 houses over from here, Bernard Radowski, the architectural theorist and writer, lived. And really, the more you look into every little nook of the woods, there was some very amazing intellectuals, writers, painters, academics. The Saarinens lived here off and on in the summer for many, many years. There's a Lily Saarinen, who is Eero's first wife, and her children still, her children still own the house, the Saarinen house. It was designed by Hammerstrom. Gropius did a house in Provincetown, or his firm did. There's some evidence that he did design it. And that is presently, it's privately owned and is just sold and is being restored by the new owner. We're trying to get people in who are going to research particular parts of the story that haven't been researched. So like Hammerstrom, there's like nothing written on him. He's a kind of a unknown in architectural history. Did some really interesting things. So getting people in to really tackle pieces of the story and research them. And then we're doing artists in residence, and we're having artists who will use the buildings in their artwork in some way, or whose artwork has to do with this period. So we're having a filmmaker come, Erica Beckman, who's going to bring her students and do a stop-motion animation film of this house using projected light on the different planes, and we want people who are going to really use the building and the site in their artwork. Yeah. Well, we are going to be we're going to be renting these houses in the summer to either individuals or groups. So we're trying to rent the houses for as small a time as possible in the summer. So and that rent is partially a tax-deductible donation. So if people are interested in participating in that, it's great. Or if they want to participate as volunteers, and we are fundraising now for the Hatch House, which is an amazing, really beautiful building, which is now abandoned and deteriorating pretty quickly, which we're trying to get a lease on for next year.